I mean, this need for creating a following is, quite frankly, become more important actually than the book itself.
Yeah. Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and or listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, which is a Facebook Live event, a podcast on YouTube, and many other places. And if you like this, I hope you like it on Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it, and stick with us. And if you want to share this, of course, you can tell other people about it. Today, I am going to be talking with a very interesting man who interviewed me on his podcast a while back, and who I just saw at the Wild Goose Festival in North Carolina, where we both attended. This is Brian Allain, who is a leader in something called Writing for Your Life, a resource center and conference for spiritual writers, which includes Publishing in Color conference series happening September 13 to 17. I will be talking with my guest, Brian Allain, at the Writing for Your Life conference, which begins November 8, and will also feature conversations with guests Diana Butler-Bass and Sophronia Scott. We have links to these conferences on our show page. So, Brian, let me welcome you here. You know, when we talked before, you were telling me about your various projects, and one of them that really interested me, and in fact, since then, I have touched base with one of the women you're working with, is this whole Women of Color Writing Project. In no particular order, can you just start there? First of all, tell us what you do every day and why you were so involved with promoting and managing and agenting and helping and opening doors for writers and other people, and particularly this Women of Color project. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, Frank, thanks very much for having me on here. And it was really a great pleasure to meet you, to do the podcast together we did previously, and to collaborate there at Wild Goose. It was just such a fun event. But yeah, let me give you a little bit of background in terms of how all this came about. This is all a second career for me. I spent most of my life doing completely different things. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering, an MBA, and I did high-tech related stuff most of my life. But several years ago, one of my classmates said, "Hey, how'd you like to come work with me?" And after I was there for a couple of years, he came into my office and said, "I've got a project that I'd like you to work on. It's for my father-in-law, Frederick Buechner." And for those that don't know Frederick Buechner, he's an incredibly gifted and talented writer who published 40 books over a period of decades. One was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. One was nominated for the National Book Award. He's got like a dozen honorary degrees from all over the place. But, you know, he had not done, any self-promotion or marketing his entire career. So basically his family asked me to bring him online, introduce him to a new generation of readers. And so that's how I got involved in the whole spiritual publishing arena. And 5 years ago, I turned 60 and said, okay, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I didn't want to go back into high tech. So I started Writing for Your Life, which is, as you said, a resource center for spiritual writers. And most of what we do is give as much away as we can for free. Articles, videos, downloads, all kinds of things to try to nourish spiritual writers. But as I started doing that, one of the things I kept hearing is that writers of color are really underrepresented in terms of the number of books that get published. And so I said to myself, well, okay, there's a real need, right? And I'm not an agent, I'm not an editor, I'm not even an author myself, but everywhere I've ever been in business, so much is dependent upon who you know and who knows you. And I know how to put on conferences. So I said, well, let me start this new conference series called Publishing in Color that's specifically oriented toward introducing writers of color to people from the Christian spiritual publishing arena, and just foster relationships and see what happens. And I was pretty confident that coming out of that, we'd get book deals. And sure enough, that's been the case. Book deals, literary agent signings, magazine articles, contributions to other books, et cetera, et cetera. So
now you introduced me to one writer in that project who is both a woman of color, a writer, and also a literary agent. And I talked with her, and I think I'm going to be interviewing her here on this podcast. Can you just take a little diversion here so we get to know at least one of the people you're working with and talk about her a little bit and introduce us to her?
Absolutely. Her name is Javon Bolden. And as you said, she's a literary agent. She's an editor. She's published her own books. And when I first started publishing in color, I was scouting around for folks in the industry who were people of color. And at that point in time, this was only 2018, when we did the first Publishing in Color conference, so not that long ago. She was the only African-American agent who I could find in the Christian publishing arena at that time. Now there are a few more, but it's still obviously a limited set. So in any event, I was just so impressed with Javon's entrepreneurship. She had already accomplished so many different things. And I said, well, she's perfect for the kind of conference that I was, putting on. So she's spoken, I think, at every one of the conferences that I've done.
Now, these conferences that you do in the COVID era, are these done by Zoom calls or other means, or are you doing any in-person stuff right now? I know we just saw each other at an in-person get-together at Wild Goose in North Carolina last week, but other than that, have you been anywhere and done anything, or is this all online?
So when I started Both Writing for Your Life in 2017 and Publishing in Color in 2018, I did predominantly in-person conferences.
Yes.
But since the start of the pandemic, actually in 2020, I had 8 separate conferences planned, in-person conferences planned for different dates and different locations throughout the year. And of course, all that went away. And so I've been doing them online ever since. And that has gone incredibly well, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So
let me backtrack up a second before we go further, because your connection with Buechner is interesting. And I think some of the folks who listen to this will know who he is. But for those who don't, can you take 5 minutes and tell us not only who he was, but if you had to, encapsulate what he was saying, what's your 3-minute thumbnail sketch in Buechner 101 for those who don't know why you are so possessed by his writing and interested, and also for so many other people who follow Buechner? Just tell us a little bit about who he is, because I think that'll tell us something more about you.
Well, certainly. He's had an incredible impact on my life. And I'd never actually heard it before, I started working on his behalf. Most of my reading beforehand was business books and technology.
Sure.
And like that. So Mr. Buechner, he's 95 years old. And, as I mentioned earlier, he published like over 40 books, all kinds of genres. Half of those roughly are novels. Mm-hmm. But he's got books of sermons, books of other nonfiction. He's got 4 memoirs that are just incredibly compelling. And his writing is incredibly powerful. One of his strengths was that he could say very profound things very succinctly. And so when we went to bring him online, having that kind of treasure of content that had that attribute of being very profound and very succinct just made itself for social media.
Yeah.
But what's the gist of Frederick Buechner? Obviously, anyone that compelling, that gifted, is hard to say, but one of the titles of his books was Listening to Your Life. And he wrote a lot about paying attention to your life and the things that go on that oftentimes we just ignore or just brush over or what have you. And, think about what's the only way that God can really speak to us? Predominantly it's through the lives that we live and the incarnation of, God in all of us. And so the name Writing for Your Life, was something that I thought of because of his words, listening to your life.
Where would you say he's coming from on the spectrum of religious experience? Me, I've written in my memoir, like Crazy for God, about my journey out of right-wing fundamentalist evangelicalism to a more progressive Christianity, and then beyond that to what I call being an atheist who believes in God, which is my way of sort of talking about the enigma of paradox and uncertainty and the journey. My new book that's coming out in November that you and I have talked about, and I've asked you to help me promote, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, takes the position that human connection is much more important than career or the definition of how much money we have or the usual attributes of what we call success. And you seem to resonate with that. Where's Buechner coming from? I would thumbnail describe myself, just to give you an example of what I'm fishing for here. as a former right-wing evangelical, now a progressive liberal activist on social issues and politics, but at the same time, appreciative of my evangelical background and the vision it gave me in terms of a life that is centered on something of a higher value than simply yourself. And I've kept that. And that's where my new book comes from, because it is a statement about faith in the fact that evolution crafted us in such a way where we appreciate human connection and caring for others in ways that's what makes us really happy, and not career definition. You're a good example of that, by the way. You seem like a very happy guy right now, and you're helping people, not expecting much in return at the end of a different kind of career. And I'm just guessing, and you can correct me, that you find more joy in helping some of these young writers get going and mothering them, as it were, than you do in simply aggrandizing yourself and or making some more money or having another box to tick off in your career or something like that. So will you just take some of that and try to make sense of it in terms of Buechner and you and the intersection of your base values?
Sure.
That you're bringing to the table now.
Mr. Buechner grew up in a very secular, non-church, non-religious environment, and ended up living in New York City, and didn't have anything better to do on Sunday morning, so he dropped into this church, Trinity, church in downtown Manhattan. And he went there a few times and was just compelled by the preacher. And one of the things he said, during one of his sermons, just so struck Buechner that he decided, I have to go find out about this stuff. And, the pastor said, well, you can just come to church and learn these things. No, I need to go to seminary. I need to go to school, because this is just so fundamental and so important. So he ended up enrolling at Union Theological Seminary in Manhattan and got a degree, was an ordained Presbyterian pastor, but never pastored a church.
Yeah.
He was the director of the religion program at a private secondary school, private high school for like 9 years. But otherwise, his main ministry was his writing.
Yeah. And,
so talk about kind of an amazing conversion. He talks about that whole experience in his first memoir, Sacred Journey.
Yeah.
And so just like some of the things that he wrote is very compelling.
And where are you at in your spiritual journey? And by the way, this is Frank Schaeffer. This is my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And I'm talking with Brian Allain, leader of Writing for Your Life, a resource center who puts on conferences for spiritual writers, which include Publishing in Color, which is a project he does to help writers get started and succeed, and conferences. And so, let's get a quick snapshot of where you're at. You've talked a little bit about Buechner and his conversion. You're 60-something. How does that journey shape you? Where did you begin, if anywhere, when it comes to religion and philosophy? How did you transition to wherever you are now? Where are you? And how do you see that? Where are you going?
So I grew up in the United Methodist Church. My parents, and I went to church, almost every Sunday. I thought about becoming a pastor myself when I was, in my late teens and later in life as well. And fortunately decided not to, because I don't think I would have been very good at that. I don't think it was a good match for my skill set. So kind of mainline Protestant, is where I started.
Yeah.
And, as I said, spent most of my career-wise doing high-tech stuff, which, back to, I loved it. I really got to work with lots of wonderful people. I was always kind of on the leading edge of technology. I wasn't interested in the boring old stuff. I wanted to launch new businesses.
Yeah.
But, as you indicated, what I'm doing now is such an incredible gift. Yeah. To be at this stage of my life and be able to help the kind of people that I do the kind of work that, as I said, I'm not a writer, but so many writers now need marketing capabilities and those kinds of skills that they don't typically, have.
Well, so part of that is a function of the fact that the publishing industry is so changed. I've been a writer for more than 35 years, novels, fiction, nonfiction. There used to be such a thing as publishers. They'd do your book. They would take care of things. Now they just ask you, how big is your social media footprint? And it's really just a whole different world. So essentially, without someone like you to help people navigate that, or in my case, my producer, Ernie, who put together this podcast for us today, or my publicist at the publishing company. These days, a lot of it is not so much traditional book readings in bookstores and so on. It's all this other stuff, some of which we're doing here today. How do you help these folks navigate that? I mean, what practically are you able to do?
Well, there are several different aspects of this, but one of the most important things is part of a class that I give called The Business of Being a Spiritual Writer.
And where do you give that class?
It used to be in person and now it's online. So,
yeah.
There's another class coming up in early November. Is the next one. But in any event, there are 4 topics for that class. One is just an overview of the publishing industry and a little bit of a deeper dive on self-publishing. The second component is marketing strategy. The third component is marketing tactics. And the fourth is just a little bit of thoughts on entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
With the 2 in the middle, the marketing strategy, I think of any of the areas, first of all, gets most overlooked. And secondly, is the area where people fail the most.
And which is?
The tendency for most folks is to be too broad in terms of their entry in the market.
Yeah.
I used to be a pastor and now I want to publish my sermons or, things like that, right? In today's world, as you said, establishing a following, AKA platform,
yes,
is one of the most important things, not only to get a publisher interested, but also to sell your books once you have either a published, self-published, or traditionally published book.
Yes.
If no one knows about it, they're not going to be able to buy it, right? So, this need for creating a following is, quite frankly, become more important actually than the book itself.
Yeah.
I view. Not that that's good, not that that's right, but that's a fact.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. So how do you enter a market that's incredibly crowded, incredibly noisy? Well, my advice to folks is be extremely narrow. You got to be known for something first before you're known for something else.
Yes.
All right. So pick an area that you can really become known for. Either you're an expert in it or you're really good at, humor or empathy or entertainment or whatever the case may be. Pick that and be really good at that. And give your elevator pitch about, okay, here's how I'm serving people and why I'm the right person to do it. Then when it gets to kind of the tactical level, it's like that's changes every month, right? Yes. In terms of what works and what doesn't on social media. Unfortunately, it's become so crowded that if a author or other kinds of business entity doesn't spend money in advertising, it's very difficult to organically grow anything, regardless of the value of whatever it is that you're trying to promote.
Yeah.
So, that's an unfortunate thing. The good news about social media and the internet in general is that it bypasses the gatekeepers. Yeah. Right? You don't have to have a publisher in order to build a following. You don't have to have a TV show or a radio show or newspaper or whatever, magazine. All those gatekeepers are less important in their hegemony on the market, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's the good news. The bad news is that the internet and social media are available to anybody, where you're trying to sell cars or laundry detergent or books or whatever. And the whatever, unfortunately, the wave of political agita that we've gone through creates a huge amount of angst, a huge amount of trolls, and a lot of incarnation of hate.
Well, a huge amount of misinformation, just straight out.
Misinformation too. But just like any communication tool that we've ever had, right? They can be used well and they can be misused, right? And the more powerful the tool, the more it's going to be done in both directions. And so we're just still, I think, learning about what the internet can and can't do and how it should be used. How it should be
I'll make a prediction that is totally off the wall here, in the sense that I have nothing to back this up, but intuitively, maybe it's because I'm an optimistic about the development of human history. But, as a writer who has been taken seriously as a writer in terms of the skill of writing, besides the quote message of books, I have observed over the last 40 years that I've been in the publishing business as an author who's been published, that, the change has not actually made books better in terms of the accessibility of the market to just anyone. The gatekeepers actually served a function, Now, they stopped a lot of people who might have been published when it came to the kind of elitism and white hegemony and patriarchy, too few women authors, too few authors of color. I'm not talking about that part. That has improved with people like you, but also just the awareness within the market and the publishers, more people and so forth. Or, for instance, the greatest authors of all time, many of whom were gay, had to hide the fact they were gay, or women had to write under assumed male names. There's a lot of those. So that is better. But in terms of the quality of what is actually in book form on Amazon, it's not as good. And of course, as a writer myself, who's written novels and nonfiction and labors long and hard over writing and thinks I'm a pretty good writer, and knowing other pretty good writers like my friend Andre Dubusse, the novelist, and so forth, I think there's a lot of people who have made a lifetime of writing who lament the way things are now, because there's a whole generation coming along who have not grown up reading good writing. They're reading a lot of stuff on the internet where no care is taken, not just whether it's true or not, but just the style of the writing and so on. And so I wonder, in your trying to help young writers, and well, I won't even say young writers, new writers, or people find a market, whether you are able to discern and say no to some people where you're saying, look, you know, you may know something about spirituality, maybe you're a pastor with something to say, but I want to also publish good books that will last as books in terms of their literary quality and writing, or whether you're putting more of the emphasis on the spiritual message, less on the quality of the writing. I know that's a tough question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm curious. Because the person I like least that I meet on an airplane is the person who says, yeah, you know, I'm thinking of writing a book too. And I like to turn to them and say, well, what do you do for a living while you're not writing? Oh, I'm an architect, or I'm a surgeon, or a businessman. Oh yeah, well, I want to design a building too. You know, I want to be a thoracic surgeon too. I mean, my reaction is not very charitable, but it's like, you know, screw you. I've spent 40 years becoming a writer who's serious about this. The worst of all are celebrity books. I'm thinking of writing a book. I have some actor friends of mine or people in the music business who are stars. You know, they're thinking of writing a book. Well, hey, you know, I'm thinking of starting Google. I'm thinking of being a surgeon next Thursday. I'm thinking of opening a butcher shop. I'm thinking of being a worldwide surfer champion. You know, so for me, the language that goes with writing is so demeaned now. I'm thinking of writing a book. Well, I don't like to hear that. I want to meet a young person who has been writing since they were 12, has journals full of stuff, is finding their way, got up this morning early so they could write before they went to school. They're not asking me about an agent. They're not saying I want to think about being a writer. They are a writer. And if their stuff's good, I want to help them. But this idea that, you know, anybody can write a book and publish it is not happy news to somebody who spent 40 years trying to write. And so there's a bit of resentment there, but it's not because they've caused any problems to me personally. I just don't like to see the whole market devalued, where writing just becomes this joke, where like, oh yeah, I'm thinking of writing a book. Well, good luck with that. Tell me what you wrote this morning. Tell me what you're passionate about with your writing. Tell me how you've written and written and written and written and written, and now you're looking for a publisher. That I want to hear. That's too much of a sermon, sorry, but you're in this business. So now you've gotten all the frustrations of the last 40 years, and I just unloaded on you.
No. You know, I understand what you're saying, where you're coming from, totally. I don't necessarily agree with it quite as strongly as you did, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But to your first question, I largely avoid that question, mostly because I'm not qualified to be a good judge of good writing. You know, I'm not a writer. I'm not an editor. I'm not an agent.
Sure.
That's not my role in all this.
Yes.
Right? I leave that to the people who know how to do those kinds of things well. And so I cast a pretty broad tent in terms of who I interview for my book, you know, podcast or anything else that I do. Now, when it comes to people that I invite to speak in my conferences, that's a different story. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You know, I'm predominantly looking for people who are both good writers and good teachers, good communicators. Right? So, to some degree, I avoid the issue, I guess is what I'm saying. But the broader question for me is, what's a book trying to achieve? To me, the main purpose for a book is trying to help, try to serve someone in some way, right? It used to be that as humans, we only had a limited number of ways to do that, right? Books being the primary way, quite frankly, compared to television or radio or what have you. Now we have many other forms in which we can communicate to influence people, to serve them, to entertain them, to help them, whatever the case may be, right? And it's terrible that the quality of our reading and our writing is decreased.
Yeah.
The skill level of both writers and readers is just, far less than I think it was a generation ago. Right. So I hear you on that big time. And it's a loss to our culture and our society. No question about that. But at the end of the day, put yourself 25, 50 years from now. How many people are going to be consuming this thing that we call a book today in this form when they grow up in a completely digital world? Right. So I think that, society and culture, we are still trying to come to grips with that, right?
I'm not just on the book front, though. That's interesting is that if you look at what happened with Kindle, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you in terms of the long arc of history, but, at first everything was going to be on Kindle. Now, actually, books on paper have come back very strong. The market isn't where it was pre-electronics and the digital age, but it's very strong. It's kind of like, movies were going to go away because of TV. Actually, there might be a good analogy there, because what happened was movie did not go away, but then the golden age of television with shows like The Sopranos and Deadwood, suddenly television became the movies. Maybe there's something there in terms of books aren't going away. The digital will somehow transform things, but it may not be the way we expect, because I see a lot of young people reading on paper. They're not all, and some older people doing Kindle. So I don't think it's just a generational thing. I think that actually there's a lot of young people who like vinyl, for instance, and who like books on paper, and a lot of people across the board who'd rather read on paper. They just find it more congenial.
And I do too.
Yeah.
But, so first of all, for a long period of time, it's going to be an and. It's not going to be an or, right? We're going to have, just like with your films examples. Right. It used to be the movie theater and 3 channels on TV. That was it. Now you've got a gazillion different distribution channels for films, right? So just like with thought, what are books? It's thought predominantly. Right. There are all kinds of different forms to communicate thought now. That doesn't mean the paper book will go away anytime soon. But again, why do print books sell right now? Well, because that's all we grew up with, right? A lot of us. And that's what we, gravitate toward. 50 years from now, that's not going to be the case. You're not going to have that legacy body of people that grew up with those as the predominant form factor.
Sure.
Their predominant form factor is going to be video and something online, right? Something electronic.
And the written word is still going to be the basis of the stories they're watching online, or whatever form of entertainment there is, because writing is writing. But yeah, I agree with you. The delivery systems may change. But one point I want to quiz you on a little bit on this is the whole role of editors. This new book of mine that's coming out, my editor, wonderful person, Christine Belaris, got in touch with me and said, look, you allude enough to your background so that I want more. And I know this book is not about your journey out of the evangelical world, but you have to clue your reader in as to who you are, because you say just enough to make them curious, not quite enough to really be straightforward. So, in the 24th draft of the book, after COVID started and I was rewriting it anyway to meet this moment, I went back and I rewrote the foreword. I'm really glad I had an editor, because, the only book I ever self-published, Why I'm an Atheist Who Believes in God, actually did incredibly well, because I was able to do all these marketing things you're talking about through Amazon. But that said, I've never had a book published where I didn't appreciate what a really top-notch editor did, whether that was at Penguin when I was there or any of the other publishers I've been with. I think a lot of self-published people don't know what they're missing. And I'll tell you one thing that is no substitute for a real editor, and that is a writer's group. I've never met a serious writer who wants to be part of a writer's group in terms of them doing your editorial function. Oh, I have these great friends, they read it, they give me feedback. Okay, next time, I'm sorry to use the medical illusion again, next time you have a coronary bypass, let them do that too. And see how that works out for you, is my advice.
Yeah.
To hell with writers groups. Find a pro, and an editor is an editor. So even if you're self-publishing, it's worth trying to find somebody who maybe does some editorial work as a profession, because believe me, it is a profession. It's anybody can do it, but not anybody does it well. And when you run into a good editor, like my editor at HCI Press with my new book, or my old friend, back at when I was working with Avalon, these people are irreplaceable. And wow, as a writer, when you lose a good editor or they move on or get hired by another company, it's just a tragedy in your life, because they are really, there's such a difference between someone who really knows your writing and is in your corner and doing it for a living than just friends.
I totally agree with that. First of all, I mean, the quality of good developmental editors toward the quality of a book is just incredibly important.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree with that more. Yeah. But again, it used to be that in order to have or find a good editor, you had to go through the publishing house. That's the only place that they existed. Now they've all kinds of freelancers.
Yeah.
Some of them are not any good. Some of them are really good. Some of them used to work.
That part's hard to figure out.
Well, I mean, for what it's worth, on the Writing for Life website, I have a page called Writer Services.
Yeah.
Where I've got about a dozen people that I partner with and resell their editing services.
Yes.
So these are people who have been introduced to me in various ways, who I have confidence in, that because they've edited a ton of books, they've ghostwritten a ton of books, they've written a ton of books of their own.
Sure.
And come with great recommendations.
And they can help people put their things together.
Sometimes for self-publishing purposes, sometimes just for getting yourself ready before you actually go to a publishing house.
Yeah.
And do your book proposal and everything. So yeah, I mean, there's no question that is incredible. Every serious author that I've talked to says that, Frank.
Yeah. Oh, well, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one that said it.
No. I mean, your friend, our mutual friend, Brian McLaren, right? He's told me that, multiple times.
Yeah, Brian is really, really something. Let's turn the page a minute. What's this conference that you've invited me to? You said a minute ago you invited people who you have respect for to be part of something. So that's good. I include myself here with Diana Butler Bass and Sophronia Scott, and you mentioned Brian as a friend of yours. Thank you for inviting me to participate in that. Just talk about that a little bit. What are we going to be doing?
Sure. I'm really looking forward to that. The theme of the conference is writing in the second half of life. So it's for a lot of folks that, are the person on the plane that you talk to that, is interested in writing a book, but maybe has no clue about what that really means.
And by the way, how do people who get interested in that participate or watch it or see it or benefit from it?
Well, just go to the Writing for Your Life website. On the homepage, there's a link to.
Yeah, well, we're going to link to everything on this page, and Ernie, my producer, will take care of all of that. Thankfully, not me, or it wouldn't happen. So it actually will transpire. But let's talk more about the purpose of that conference, because I think it also cuts to the heart of what you're doing across the board in helping writers. What's this conference about?
Well, for the Writing for Your Life conference, it's mostly authors with a couple of publishing industry people thrown in. The Publishing and Color conferences are the opposite.
Yes.
There are very few writers and almost exclusively literary agents, acquisitions editors, magazine editors, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So for the Writing for Your Life conference that you're talking about in November, there will be some presentations about writing, about the craft of writing. There'll be some presentations about marketing and platform development. There'll be some presentations about how to write a good book proposal, how to get published. So it's a little bit of a mix across different topics. And when I do these online, as opposed to in person, when they used to be all overlapping over 2 days, in this case, I serialized the whole thing. So it's spread out over an entire week.
Sure.
So it's basically Monday through Friday, roughly 9:30 till 5:30 Eastern time every day, jam-packed full of presentations, Q&A, panels. There's an elevator pitch feedback session. There's an open mic session. We're going to have a session with someone else who was at Wild Goose, Kate Rademacher, to talk about marketing as a spiritual practice.
Yes.
That may appear to be an oxymoron to some people, but it's not. And we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
We're going to have one session on writing for film, writing for television. So, just kind of an eclectic mix, predominantly aimed at early stage writers, right?
What were you in, this will sound funny in a public forum here, but what were you hoping that I would contribute to this other than being feisty about, hey, I don't want to meet, look, I'm like a crab crawling under a rock. I don't want to find another crab there. Don't tell me you're a writer. There's too many out there. And I hope you're not feeling well. No, okay, I'm joking.
No, you're a role model, right? You're an established, successful writer, right? Of all kinds of different genres. That's the kind of person that they need to learn from.
Yeah. You know what I will enjoy most in that conference is the Q&A, because I always find, my father used to say an interesting thing, and it's a really good quote, and I'll give you this one for free. He said, "Don't answer questions that aren't being asked." Mm-hmm. I love that. Think about that. Yes. I mean, in so many venues. So I always, when I'm doing a conference like I'll do yours, what I'll be asking you when we're not talking publicly here, but I'll ask you now because I think it's interesting, it'll bring something interesting out of you, is I always like to wait whatever time I'm given toward the Q&A. So let's say someone gives me an hour to do a presentation. I say, look, could I do my presentation in 35 minutes and leave the rest open for the Q&A? Because then you get to answer the questions that are being asked rather than assuming this is what people want to know, especially when it gets to any how-to stuff. Or relationship stuff. What do you think about that?
Totally agree. And those universally the times that the people enjoy the most in their conferences.
Yeah.
Part of it is because of the authenticity. Part of it's because as you mentioned, it's the speaker answering the questions that people are asking.
Yeah.
What they care about, hearing about.
Yeah.
What's on the top of their mind? What's their biggest worry? What's their biggest, question today?
Yeah.
So I think those two things, just the actual content as well as the authenticity on it.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. I don't want to put you on the spot. This will be a little embarrassing to you in a nice way. But, you strike me as a tremendously altruistic person. You're a white guy and you're a man, and you're in a world in which your gender and your color, like me, puts us in a position of undeserved and unearned privilege. But you're doing everything in your power to share this with young women authors, with young women authors of color, with other people who are coming in. I love this project of yours. And without putting you on the spot, but also wanting to get a real answer here, what is it that makes you this way? Why aren't you just sitting back and resting on your laurels or doing more high-tech stuff? Why do you want to reach out and help people? Because you also seem like a very level-headed person. In other words, not like
I'm an engineer,
whatever. Yeah. So what makes you tick? Why are you such an altruist?
Well, I mean, that is a difficult question, and it has many different facets to it.
Yeah, and it's embarrassing, but I'm going to stick it to you. Why are you such a good guy, and how did you get to be that way?
I've had plenty of people ask me these kinds of questions, so that's not a problem. But let me try to be succinct in terms of a couple of different dimensions of this.
Yeah.
One is that I'm so incredibly grateful. You know what I mean? For all the blessings I've had in my life, I want to give back.
Yeah.
That's probably number one. Number two, the earlier part of my life, I was probably too selfish. I was focused more on providing for my family.
Yes.
As a young white male, I felt like, okay, I've got to go out and be the breadwinner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've got to go out and have a career and make money and provide a living for whoever I end up having as a family. I was very driven by that obligation, duty, whatever you want to call it. One of the things that a completely different dimension that helps me a lot in doing all this right now is I get bored easily. And I love launching new things. So I could never just go play golf, right?
Yes.
Spend my retirement or whatever you want to call it like that.
Yeah.
I would go out of my mind.
Yeah.
So as long as I'm mentally capable and physically capable of doing this kind of stuff, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I think those are the three main elements to
good answer. And how do you think your spirituality informs that, sort of providing a platform for all of that for someone who thought of being a pastor at one time in his life? Obviously it's not by chance that you're concentrating on books with spiritual value, spiritual content. That's perhaps some of your interest in my new book and helping me get that going and other things. Talk about the spiritual component just a little more.
It goes back to that first point that I made. I feel like I've been so blessed, that I need to give back.
Yeah.
I just, when I was thinking about becoming a pastor, it wasn't really because I wanted to get up in front of an audience and speak.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I could write one good sermon and I'd be done.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect of it. I don't think I'm very good at caring for older people and nursing homes and things like that. That's just not my skill set.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, I was really feeling this strong need to, as I said, give back in some way.
Yeah.
And thank God, I think I found it.
Yeah.
Because, I've got this business background, this marketing background
Yes.
to help people that don't have that
Yeah.
and that need it today.
Yeah.
So anyway, go figure. I mean, if 15 years ago, if you would have asked me if I was going to be doing this kind of stuff, I would have looked at you like you were crazy.
Yeah.
It was not even on my radar screen. And so I'm just incredibly grateful at this stage of my life to be able to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And sometimes we back into the things that wind up meaning a lot.
Absolutely.
I've backed into this podcast series because my friend Ernie, who takes care of a lot of things for me at the George Bailey Fellowship for Morality in Public Life, which is a long name just to say that we've got a program to try to, reinfuse the public sphere with something that's been lost during the Trump years, just to give it a shorthand when it comes to George Bailey and the movie It's a Wonderful Life, up against Pottersville and that sort of horrible materialistic ethic that Trump and corporate America often represents. So we're doing something together. But then, the podcast was an idea to help launch my new book in November, but now it's taken on a life of its own. And, ironically, will turn out to be as much of a project as the book or more, in that I find it very interesting to talk to other people about what they're doing rather than simply talk about what I'm doing. Now, in this case, because you are professionally, as it were, in the second or third or fourth phase of your life, wherever you are promoting and helping authors, you're helping me coming up with ideas on introducing my book to a wider public and so forth and so on. So I'm bringing my new book into this conversation, but that's unusual. I am only doing that because you're talking to me as a writer, and you're a guy that helps writers, opens doors. So we're talking about this. But in general, I'm finding it very enriching, simply giving people a platform for their projects. I'm very interested in their project. And so I can see what you're doing. The rewards of what you're doing are great, because I feel the same way about this podcast. And so, what Ernie and I are making together here started for one reason. It's ending up being something completely different. And that is to actually platform things we believe in: women writers, women filmmakers.
Exactly.
People like Felicia Davis running the Chicago Women's Foundation, folks that we believe in, like Jose Zylstra, who runs something called Gender Fair, which is this amazing company that is a corporation that rates corporations based on how they treat women. And you can go to Gender Fair, download the app, and before you buy that next Domino's pizza or a GM product or a Pfizer medication, you can check out, how does this corporation treat women? How are they rated? So I've had a great diversity of people. And I often find too, and I don't know if you find this true, that collaboration is the only thing that makes things seem possible. So Ernie makes this possible. Jose introduces me to people that I interview. I interviewed her. You've now introduced me to someone that I'm going to be interviewing, who's a woman of color and an author and an agent who we've got booked, that we talked about earlier. To me, I love that, because writing is a solitary experience. I'm sitting here doing this on a laptop, and this is the same laptop. I sit alone for hours from 3 to 6 or 7 every morning writing. But now, you appear, and then we're doing something together. So it's a great relief as a writer to not just do the isolated stuff, but to work with someone else. So, I not only embrace your projects, I'm hoping that I don't screw up what I do with Diana Butler Bass and Sophronia Scott and manage to pull it off. So you invite me to more stuff. I like interacting with people rather than just being alone in my own head, which is not a very nice room to spend time in sometimes. I like to get out and actually see other people.
So I had a similar kind of thing happen to me, Frank. When the pandemic hit, I had to cancel all those conferences.
Yeah.
I knew all these author friends of mine who were going to be speaking all over the place at conferences or whatever, wouldn't be able to do it. And several of them are going to be introducing new books.
Yeah.
They can't do book tours, book signings, et cetera. So I thought, oh my goodness, I got to do some online interviews with these folks.
Yeah.
So started off just, video interviews, and then I turned it into a podcast too. But that was my first motivation, was just to, help them and get their work out in front of more people. As it turned out, I kept getting introduced to more and more interesting people. And we haven't really talked about my other two businesses. Besides Writing for Your Life and Publishing in Color, I also do something called Compassionate Christianity, which is a website for progressive Christians. And then I also do How to Heal Our Divides, which is a new book and platform that's focused on organizations that are actually doing something to help deal with some of these terrible issues that our culture is going through.
Who's that book by?
Well, I edited it and I compiled it.
Yeah.
A friend of mine edited it, and then we self-published it.
Yeah, that's good. And is that
but that, I mean, this is the book, How to Heal Our Divides. This is one of the early.
Because we should do another interview just on this book.
Okay. This was the advanced reader copy. That's why it says not for sale on the front of it. But so that book, this whole idea was just inside my head last November.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't talk to anybody besides my wife about it until right before Thanksgiving, when I started soliciting contributors to write chapters in the book. By Christmas, I was oversubscribed.
Yes.
Right. And then the book came out in May.
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's like quantum speed, right?
Yes, it is.
And part of it was because I didn't have to write anything. I asked 33 other people each to write a chapter.
Sure.
But there's no way in the world that I could have recruited the people to do it that quickly were it not for the network of folks that I had built in advance.
Yes.
Through these interviews, through all the other work that I had done.
Sure.
The establishment of high trust relationships is the most valuable business asset that any of us have.
Absolutely. And by the way, applies to family relationships as well, as you well know, and so forth. Make sure that we do an interview and try to promote just that book, because I think that's a whole separate subject.
I always love that.
Is that for sale now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it came out May 18th.
So
you can buy it on Amazon or IndieBound or Bookshop.
Hold it up again. Let's take.
It's called How to Heal Our Divides. And, on the cover there, I mentioned some of the more prominent contributors: Brian McLaren, Diana Butler Brass, Frank Thomas, Michael Waters, Shane Claiborne, and Parker Palma.
All of whom I know.
Yeah, and that doesn't even include all these great organizations like the Center for Racial Healing, Arabon, Roots of Justice.
Yes, and after all my cranky comments earlier about people who can't write and self-publishing, I just want to vouch for everybody on the cover of your book. Just the ones listed. They're all friends of mine, and they're all real writers.
It's like, well, I'm not going to try to write this stuff myself. I'm not a writer. I'm going to recruit friends of mine who can really do a good job. So, that's. But again, it was back to your point about collaboration. And within the high-tech industry where I grew up, I mean, you would never collaborate with a competitor.
Yes,
you were like arch enemies, right?
Right.
For a variety of reasons, but in this arena, it's completely different.
Yes.
I have two different authors who are writing books about Sabbath and rest and things like that. And they've collaborated because we all know that if someone buys one of their books, they're likely to buy the other book.
Who does a lot of that is Rabbi Rose Orr in Boston, the whole Sabbath concept. He teaches at Hebrew College or Hebrew University. I'm very bad on this, but I interviewed him, and he thinks a lot about the application of Sabbath to just a pattern of rest to an over-busy world. So, he's someone who you might want to. It's Rabbi Orr Rose. I get his name mixed up, Rose Orr. It's Rabbi Orr Rose. And he's somebody you ought to make a note, because Rabbi Orr Rose is doing a lot of work on this whole idea of Sabbath rest. Cool. Irrespective of the fact that he's a rabbi, just as a general principle for anybody, even secular people, of understanding that our culture is not better because Walmart and Home Depot are open on Sunday. Our culture is not better because we all work 24/7 and the work week merges into weekends. There was a good point in not doing any work on a certain day. This is actually a good idea, and we might want to return to that. And he's a very brilliant man. And a friend. You might, I'm sure you'll fold him into a conference at some point. Let me just talk a little bit about what you are doing in terms of coming out of this era of COVID and going back into sort of more hands-on stuff, it seems we're delayed for a while because of all these variants, but on the other hand, things are going to come back at some point. So in the best of all worlds, what would be happening to the authors you're discovering? What would be happening to these ideas of helping promote people? What would be happening with these conferences of yours that would actually change the dynamic in this culture in some way, or in some, get something started? So how do you see the need that needs to be filled? And in the best of all worlds, what would happen because of your activities in these many fields?
Wow. Well, in terms of publishing color, the best result for that is it would go away because it's no longer needed.
Right.
That's an easy one.
Yeah.
Writing for your life, I mean, basically trying to help aspiring new writers, there's always going to be a need for that.
Yes.
Now, back to your question about in-person versus online. I mean, coming from the high-tech industry, when I first started this world, I started doing webinars, I started doing in-person conferences.
Yeah.
This was, 5 years ago. It was very clear at that point in time that people preferred in-person.
Yes, of course.
Because of the pandemic, now everyone's really gotten used to,
yes,
tools like this. So I think going forward, I'm going to do both and just experiment a little bit again, which most everything I do is an experiment one way or the other.
Yeah.
So my first in-person conferences are going to be in March of next year at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta.
Okay.
So do a 2-day Writing for Your Life conference, a single-day Business of Being a Spiritual Writer class, and then a 2-day Publishing in Color conference all in the same week.
Yeah.
In person.
Is Vanderbilt there, or is that somewhere else?
That's in Tennessee.
That's Tennessee. I spoke at both of those schools one time on the same trip. So in my head, there's not a flight in between, but there is, or a drive.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen down there at that conference?
Well, it's going to be a similar, to the one that you're, going to be speaking at in November. It's just all compressed into, and so I won't be able to have as many speakers.
Sure.
Like that, because not everybody can travel.
It's in real time. Yeah.
So, but it'll be, Barbara Brown Taylor will be the keynote speaker, and several folks. So, in any event, I'm going to start doing those again in person, but I'm still going to continue doing online only conferences as well, because there are several people that it's difficult for them to travel wherever, Atlanta or Nashville or Chicago or New Jersey or wherever I'm doing one of these conferences. And as I said, because of the acclamation that people have got, and because of better technology, Zoom is way better than many of the
Why don't you do one with Rabbi Or Rose up here in Boston? So it'll be like a 45-minute drive for me.
Well, let's talk about that offline.
He'd be a good person. I'm seriously wanting to connect you two.
Good.
Yeah,
I've wanted to do a conference in Boston. I have never done one yet. So I need
maybe he'll invite you to Hebrew College or Hebrew University or whatever it is he does. But he's a big deal up there.
Cool. That sounds like a plan.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the project that you and I are working on, which is me helping you promote these writers and folks that you're giving me names, and I'm putting them on my podcast, and we'll follow that through. You're inviting me to your conference. And you are also helping me in certain ways promote this new book of mine that comes out November 2nd. I want to talk about the kind of shared philosophy of what you're doing and that project here, since I brought it in earlier. And that is, it's my contention that our culture has really damaged people's ability to be happy by putting them in a position where they define themselves and their own self-worth by their career, by their title in their job, by the amount they earn. Whereas evolution programmed us to define ourselves by the quality of our relationships. And so we're doing that right now in terms of sharing these ideas and so forth and so on. And I want to just ask you, and again, sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, but how would you see me taking this book and doing what I hope it becomes, and that is really making it a project that goes far beyond me, where maybe they don't even remember the name of the book or the author who started it, but it becomes a thing. I don't care if the book sells or not. Of course I care, but that's not what I'm talking about. How, in your wisdom as someone who does this online stuff, how do we take this basic thesis of mine that actually COVID was a good thing in some ways, in the sense that it made us all go home and think about what we really value most? The price was very high, but we were about due for that pause. And now we've had it. rather than steaming back into the same commercial market where shareholder profits define everything, how do we make what I'm saying, that I know you agree with because you're doing it too with all these connections, how do we make that a thing where the reshaping of America as we come out of COVID is driven by the ideas you and I share about this, that I talk about in my book? And so whether that book becomes a bestseller or not, I'd like the project to become a thing. You see what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. This is exactly
even if I'm utterly forgotten and out of the picture. So how do we do that?
The book is just one element of a message, right? You know, a platform, exactly. Whatever you want to call it. Exactly. If your message and your theme and your purpose is X, right?
Yeah.
You've got all kinds of different ways to communicate X and to help people or serve people around that theme, right? Yeah. The book is just one of those ways.
Yeah.
So first of all, you're already doing a ton of great things. I mean, the podcast, the building relationships with other people where, you know, you can help them at the same time that you're, you know, getting the word out about your book. That's all what I preach to people, right? So, I mean, you know, I will go back to a really important aspect of the elevator pitch, right? You know, 50-word things that says, here's what I have to offer, and how it can benefit you. So being incredibly crisp about that. Right now, some, you know, people can get that across in the title and subtitle of a book.
Right.
Sometimes it's a little bit fuzzier, right? You know, but number one in my mind, the starting point of anything having to do with this whole world that we're talking about is the elevator pitch, the really crisp, you know, who am I trying to serve and how am I trying to serve them?
Right.
Period. Right. Now, once you get past that, then it's much more tactical.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as we were talking about earlier, today's world is incredibly noisy.
Yes.
So, you know, I mean, it used to be, you know, maybe if you showed up on Oprah or something like that, that was the answer. Right. And maybe it still is, you know, to some people. Unfortunately, it seems as though if you don't already have a you mentioned the whole celebrity thing.
Yes, right.
This is one of my gripes about a lot of the large publishing houses these days. Is that's all we're going after, a celebrity.
Yeah, and they want a one-off thing from some actor or whoever.
Yeah, I mean, they just want to take advantage of a platform that someone's already built for some completely other reason.
Yeah.
To throw out some book.
Yeah.
I'll say that generously. That may be wonderful, it may be fantastic, or maybe not a lot of substance.
Right.
Right. So, you know, how do you, to me, and I think, you know, you're the same way. I mean, we care about the substance, right? I mean, we're trying to help people. We're trying to serve people. We're trying to do something. At the end of the day, that's going to win.
And it seems to me too, let me throw something out. We're going to wrap this up in a second, but just respond to this thought. It seems to me, as I look back on my writing career in terms of what books sold and why, other than the merit of the book, that there's also a lot of right time and right place. And it seems to me that with your projects now of connecting to a younger generation of writers and my project with Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, that book, the message that we should be defined by the quality of our relationships and connections and not by our careers. It seems to me anyway, maybe I'm just being optimistic, this is a right time and right place, because if ever there was a moment people are reconsidering priorities, it's now. And that 10 years ago, not so much. Who knows what the future is? But right now, there are a lot of people saying, wow, you know, is modern corporate America and, you know, the better job, the bigger paycheck, is that really all I want? And I think a lot of people are saying, no, I want something more. Absolutely. And do you agree? Do you think time and place?
There was an article I was reading online this morning. One of the daily emails that I get was basically saying that. That's one of the they were talking about it from an economic perspective in the jobs market. Why are so many people not going back to work?
Right.
It's exactly what you said.
Yeah. And I think my book will help explain that, but also offer a real agenda and a legislative agenda as well. And I would hope people would, who want to help this particular project out, do some pre-ordering on Amazon to get my numbers up, because stupidly, that stuff matters, doesn't it?
Yes, there's a very practical aspect to all this, isn't there?
Yeah, all those swanky reviewers and people, you know, they poo-poo Amazon and then they look there to see if they're going to take the book seriously. It's really crazy.
But I mean,
well, listen,
your point about getting the word out in many different places as you can is so, important, because you never know when one of those is really going to be an impetus.
Yes, we will have you back to discuss how to heal our divides. And I look forward to seeing you at the Writing for Your Life conference, which we will also promote on all my sites. I love what you're doing. I admire you as a human being. And, I thank you so much for being here today.
Well, same here, Frank. I mean, my goodness, the values that you're instilling in folks with just that book alone, right? And forget all the things that you already did. I mean, just what you're doing right now is just, really incredible.
I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be at the conference and speaking. And let's promote your book, How to Heal Our Divides. Much love. We will see you out there.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.